Good morning, this is Kari Sullivan with the State Department of Education. Welcome to our virtual mentoring webinar. It's my pleasure today to ask John Fasanelli to please review the housekeeping items. John, if you don't mind reviewing the housekeeping items.
Just know that the webinar today will be for 1 hour. All of you should be able to see the question box on your screen. If you have any questions, you can enter them in the question box. You also have a chat box, so please do not use the chat box. Use the question box to ask your questions. That way the panelists will be able to see your questions and we can answer them as we go along. You all should be muted, but please double check to make sure that your microphones are muted so we don't get any background noise. And the webinar will be recorded for future distribution. So if you miss anything, don't worry, we'll record it and we'll post it on our website, and it will be posted with a transcript as well, so you can do some word searching and find the specific answers to some of your questions, or to go back and review the materials. And we will share that information at the end or following the webinar to let you know where that is on our website. It'll be on our chronic absence webpage for those of you who are familiar with that.
Thank you, John. At this point, I'd like to introduce you to our panelists today. We have from the Connecticut State Department of Education, Charlene Russell Tucker, who's our Deputy Commissioner, and John Fasanelli, who's our Division Director of the Bureau of Health, Nutrition, Family Services, and Adult Education. And then myself, I'm Kari Sullivan Custer, and I'm the State Attendance Lead here at the department. We also have with us today our partners at the Governor's Prevention Partnership. We have Roland Harmon, who's our co-presenter and administrative officer at the partnership, and we have Aristide Hill, who's the mentoring program manager. Welcome. And from Bridgeport, we are going to have a local perspective. From Bridgeport, we have Anne Gribben, our Executive Director of School Volunteer Association of Bridgeport, Faith Harrison Villegas, who's the Executive Director of the Bridgeport Public Education Fund, and Michael Testani, who is the Superintendent of Bridgeport Public Schools. Welcome, everyone, and we really appreciate our partnership today for this webinar. Today's agenda, as John said, we only have an hour, so it's going to be aggressive. We're going to go over a welcome and setting the stage. Relationships are key, and then coordination of virtual mentoring programs. Bright spots, our Bridgeport model, supports to districts and schools, and then keeping in touch. I will turn this over to Charlene Russell Tucker to begin the welcome.
Thank you, Kari, and thank you all to all our panelists who have joined us today for this webinar, and to all of you that's out there who thought it important to join us for this webinar on virtual mentoring as a tool to improve student engagement in remote and hybrid learning models. For those of you that checked out the paper today, I'm sure you saw an article that referenced student engagement. So I would like to say that this is a very timely webinar for us to be talking with our partners about what are the tools and techniques necessary and used in mentoring as a way to engage your students into learning. We recognize, I saw it was on the slide before, that a caring relationship matters. And this is a way to hear from our colleagues and those in Bridgeport, superintendent and other colleagues, to share with us the models that they've been using and what some bright spots are. And so thrilled to be doing this with the Governor's Prevention Partnership. We have a long working relationship as we've been working for many years now on issues of attendance and chronic absence specifically. And this allows us just to drill down into mentoring and mentorship, which we know are the research documents, right, the outcomes that you can receive in improving student engagement and attendance through mentoring. So I'm really thrilled to have our colleagues here to share this information with you. Thank you. I am sure that we'll continue engagement even after today as we continue to make sure that our students are present. We know being present is a precursor to engagement, and engagement then a precursor to having positive academic outcomes and total well-being. So this is critical and so important. So thank you for joining us, and I'll turn this back over to Kari.
Thank you, Charlene. I'm going to turn this over to Roland Harmon from the Governor's Prevention Partnership to help us with our welcome. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kari, and to our partners at the State Department of Education, to Anne, to Faith, to Michael for joining us today. I just want to echo the welcome that has given, and really appreciate everyone joining us for this special time. You know, these are unique times that we're in, and I know we're all concerned about the health and well-being of our young people, and even concerned about their learning environment, whether that's a hybrid approach, whether that's in class, or whether it's virtual. We feel that at the Governor's Prevention Partnership, one, we've been doing this work for quite some time, supporting school-based mentoring programs, or just the mentoring infrastructure across the state since the early 90s. And we have come to work with the State Department of Education, Charlene and her team, a few years ago. And Charlene, you invited us to go to Washington, D.C. We presented at a national conference on student attendance, and we were able to move the needle a little bit here in Connecticut with tapping into evidence-based approach strategies in mentoring. We know it works. We know that when mentoring is done right, we have positive youth outcomes for young people, and it's one relationship at a time, right? And connecting with that young person, checking in with them on a regular basis. And so we appreciate everyone joining us today. The partnership stands ready to support schools that want to launch a virtual mentoring program or switch over for in-person mentoring to virtual mentoring. So we stand ready to support. We are here, and we're looking forward to the tools and resources that we'll be able to share today through this forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harmon. And I'm going to jump in now just to continue to set the stage before we turn it over to our partners. So the idea about today is as Mr. Harmon mentioned, the Governor's Prevention Partnership Mentoring Program is really what we like to refer to as the gold standard in mentoring. But in these times when there are fewer students in the buildings and more students and families are learning remotely, the conversation today will be how to pivot from in-person mentoring to a virtual mentoring model, and the challenges and the successes that our friends at the Governor's Prevention Partnership have identified. And with that, what are some of the coordination activities that need to happen for virtual mentoring programs? Things like virtual etiquette and considerations, permissions, consent forms, how to get started, and how to connect over a virtual platform. Not as easy as connecting to a young person, certainly in person. And then again, thanks for our partners at Bridgeport Public Schools for being on the call to talk to us about how it's working in their schools as a model that other districts can think about employing. And then lastly, as Charlene had started to mention, relationships are key to student engagement and student success, right? It all begins with relationships. So as we continue to talk about mentoring, we start with developing meaningful relationships with students. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Kari.
Okay, thank you, John. I appreciate that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the relationships and before the Governor's Prevention Partnership starts. And I just wanted to bring to everyone's attention a document and resource entitled the Attendance Playbook from Future Ed and Georgetown University, where they talk about a caring relationship is key to student success, and mentoring is a evidence-based model where students are more likely to come to school, feel like they belong, and reduce absenteeism. Once a school identifies, which we're doing now, we know who those students are who are having problematic attendance or engagement, especially during virtual learning. Mentoring can be used to improve not only attendance, but also student achievement. Mentor, who's a national nonprofit dedicated to the practice of mentoring and works very closely with Connecticut and the Governor's Prevention Partnership, cites research by showing that students who meet regularly with mentors are 52% less likely to skip a day of school than similar students without such a support. This guidance document, the attendance playbook, they issued a new version in June called Smart Strategies for Reducing Chronic Absence in the COVID era. And they've updated their original playbook for each of the interventions on what to do with virtual learning and COVID. So they recommend that schools add virtual options for mentoring and expand the ranks of mentors to support more students returning to school. We need more mentors than ever after the pandemic. Virtual mentoring portals have been keeping students and their mentors connected while schools are getting off the ground. There are some successful models that I'd just like to share. I'm sure many of you have heard of Check and Connect, the success mentors model out in New York City, and the AmeriCorps model, which the Governor's Prevention Partnership has had success with in an elementary school in Hartford. In the attendance playbook, you can also find links to these programs I just mentioned, the research and resources. There's lots of information there. So when we share these slides, you will have that link to the attendance playbook. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Aristide Hill.
Thank you, Kari. So yeah, so I can go ahead and just talk about the outline of the presentation, if you don't mind. And schools are open in a variety of configurations right now, regardless of mentees. They need to connect with their mentors now more than ever, because this is a very critical time. And like you said, there are some students that are disengaged right now, and schools can't do it alone. They need programs and organizations like the Governor's Prevention Partnership to come alongside and provide that assistance right now. And so we all need to work together to make that happen. And that's just something that we're here willing to do at the partnership, as well as other community-based programs to support those school-based programs, to have those one-on-one relationships with a purpose continue on at this time. So some of the things that we're going to talk about is to provide guidelines and templates for mentoring coordinators, as well as mentors at school districts on virtual mentoring during COVID-19. Also suggest virtual etiquette for mentors and connecting with their mentees. That's very important, because we know that you have to have the information in order to present to your mentees in the right way. And then also we're going to examine the Governor's Prevention Partnership virtual mentoring resources on our webpage that anybody can click on, and we've been getting a lot of traffic from people all around the country as we provide those items. The next thing we're going to talk about, and we can go ahead, is to talk about some of the bright spots, how to pivot from in-person mentoring to virtual mentoring. And we have, of course, our Bridgeport team, Ann Gribbins, Executive Director of School Volunteer Association of Bridgeport, Faith Villegas, Executive Director of Bridgeport Public Education Fund, and of course, Mike Tessiani, Superintendent of Schools from Bridgeport Public Schools. So Faith, if you'd like to kick us off on what it was like to pivot from in-person to virtual, and what that entailed, and how you're moving forward for the school year.
The pivot, as we've termed it, the pandemic pivot from in-person mentoring to virtual mentoring was something that we started off in the summertime with. And we were able to get a lot of experience by understanding what were some of the etiquette, because we did attend some trainings from GPP over the summer and approaching the school year. We talked about parental engagement and permissions. We obviously knew that was important, but we also understood that we needed to fulfill a need. It wasn't just going about our regular day, the regular parameters and scope that we had with the program. We really had to be cognizant of the data that was coming out from March all the way until you could even say last week, if you will. We had to be cognizant of the needs, understanding what was happening at the college in order for our organization to really make a swift pivot, but we also wanted to be effective. We didn't just want to say we're doing this without giving it great consideration to who would be our partners. Mr. Testani was one of the first people that I reached out to and said, this is what's going on. How do you feel like we can help address some of these needs? And one of my biggest concerns was the number of students who were not engaging while they were learning at a distance. So we decided for our program, We knew that there would be a hybrid model. We had experience working virtually over the summer. We trained mentors. We took a lot of that learning, applied it to the start of this school year. But again, it was about the data and the needs and understanding that those of our partners. So right now, our organization is not only working with the superintendent's office, but we're working with Mrs. Carly Roca-Reyes, who is helping with parental engagement and also working with the support staff, be it guidance counselors, paraprofessionals, other aides that are helping us to make the connections with our students. We're working with our partner colleges and universities to help us make connections and maintain connections with our mentors. So it was a lot of work to kind of get maybe 15 to 20 different organizations and or institutions together for one full purpose, and that was to mentor youth for success in careers, college, and life. So it was learning, a lot of learning, data-driven, and experience, and expecting that we will have some hiccups in the road, but we're excited.
Thank you, Faith. And if you can just talk a little bit about what it was like for you as well, I'd love to hear from you and your program.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, it certainly calls on one's creativity in these times. As Kari was having problems with her slides, I had trouble with my audio. And, you know, it really points out to us the problems that parents and students have getting online just to do their studies. That if we're having these problems, certainly they are too, with less sophisticated equipment and without IT support, you know, right at hand. So kudos to the parents and to the children. When the whole pandemic started in March, we had just planned the next day to have an outing with our mentors and mentees. So fortunately, I had a good set of phone numbers for all the parents. And Superintendent Tastani had given permission for the mentors to call their students when they were working remotely. And so we just launched a big phone call blitz, and we called and texted parents left and right to get their permission to connect with the mentors. And I will say that there were a number of very successful phone calls, relationships that extended through the school year, and some who never were able to make contact. Because let's face it, children were using their parents' phones and parents were at work. And, you know, there were a number of roadblocks, and parents have minutes on their phones too. So there are some limitations. There were some wonderful successes and some lessons learned. And one of the lessons that I learned was an interesting one. Children are not geared to talk on the phone now. They do the soundbite minutes. They text, they FaceTime, they do that sort of thing. But to have a conversation is a skill set. And it certainly is a skill set that they're going to need as they go forward, because we all know that many job interviews take place via phone to begin with. So I feel this is an interesting skill that we're helping children develop. I mean, you talk about attendance and a caring person and all those kind of other things, and they're learning skills that we often don't even think about. So over the course of the summer, I think some of the mentors and the mentees stayed in touch. And we've been slow in getting the whole program up and running for this year. You know, there've been, you know, we've got children learning remotely. We've got children in school. We've got some schools on hybrid, and things will change again as we go into the fall. So what I've done initially is to talk to each of the mentors to find out if they're willing to connect virtually or via phone call. And then I had to, of course, identify the children, because we have children in about 22 different schools throughout the district. And some have moved to charter schools, some have moved out of state, some have switched schools in the district, some are learning remotely. So I've gone through that whole inventory sort of thing. The mentors have been offered the opportunity to attend the trainings that the Governor's Prevention Partnership has put on, such as the virtual mentoring, which was terrific and gave them some really, really good tips. And because it's posted online, those who weren't able to attend can attend that way. So I've kept the mentors up to date with the trainings, and I have sent them the etiquette sheets. And I've gotten approval now for an opt-out form that will be sent to the parents. So
Awesome.
rather than asking their permission again, because we ask it initially when they joined the program, they were asked when, last spring. So now we're giving them an opt-out. And the choice that we're giving them is if the students are in school, we're going to try to connect them virtually and ask our overworked guidance counselors once again to try to facilitate these meetings. And it is through the Microsoft Teams system, which is a good secure system, but is not as intuitive as, the Zoom. And also, again, we have mentors with different skill levels with technology. And then for those children who are learning remotely, initially, we're going to stick with the phone calls and try to handle it that way. And as the year progresses, we'll see if maybe we can get more of those remote learners into a virtual learning. But our guidance counselors and our teachers are so overworked right now. We're trying not to load too much on them. And I think if we do it piecemeal this way, it will work better. I will say that our guidance counselors are really committed to this program because they see the impact that it has on the children, and a lot of them are willing to just jump in and go the extra mile, which is great. And just a couple little stories I can tell you, and I know I'm running over my 2 or 3 minute limit, but let me just throw this one in, that we had a student who was, quote, learning remotely from high school, and she wasn't showing up. And the teacher reached out to the mentor to say, can you help? Because the mentor was conversing with the student. And she kept conversing with the student, and I don't think they had a lot of luck getting the child in, but at least there was that connection, and the connection was staying between the mentor and the teacher and the student, so that she knew that somebody cared and somebody was looking out for her. And I think this year she's going to be a little bit more proactive, and in fact, the school has made her an in-person learner more days than the hybrid as a result of all this. So I think our mentors not only help with the connections, but I also know that they are terrific advocates for our students too. I had one mentor a couple of years ago who moved out of state, and she was after me and after me and after me to get another mentor for her mentee. Well, with that kind of prompting, I got a second mentor who then, as life happens, a year later moved out of state. And don't you know, that first mentor was after me and the second one to get another mentor for this child. And we did. So the child's on her third mentor.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Go ahead, Aristide.
Yeah, and Superintendent Tasani, we could hear from you. We've heard from the boots on the ground, and now from the leadership perspective, you allow them to do this wonderful work within the school system. We would just want to hear from your perspective.
Well, I truly believe that it's extremely important for our students to be well known by someone that they feel safe, they trust, with their personal thoughts and feelings outside of their inner circle, whether that be their family and their friends. We all know the importance of mentoring to academic success, social emotional success, and personal self-awareness. So the one thing that concerned me the most when we shut down back in March was that there was a lot of students that just were not connected with school. My concern was what was happening in homes that were not conducive to health and safety of our kids. And as we did more outreach, the concerns tended to grow and grow. So I thought it was extremely important that we had a contact person that we can filter through a lot of these things. And as was mentioned, we brought a position, I created a position here in the district that is able to coordinate the efforts with our school counselors, our support staff, and also our parents, because obviously a big component of mentoring is building a good relationship between the mentor and the families, so that they can believe and trust the person that they're trusting their child to, so that that relationship can grow and flourish. So I think that's just our commitment here as we move forward. As Ann mentioned, and Faith, we have some students that are exclusively working remotely, which is still concerning to me. We have students at our high schools working in a hybrid, and then we have full-time in person in our elementary schools. But the needs seem to just be growing and growing as as we don't get back to a normal school year and a school day for our kids. I know there's families that are struggling. We're still trying to locate some families that, since we closed in March, we haven't been able to locate. So that raises a lot of concerns on my part on, are these kids being cared for? If they've left the country, if they've left the state, are they enrolled in school? So we are committed to programs that can benefit our students. We're trying to build in some time at our high school level for an advisory period where our teachers can fill some of the void as well, because I think it's important that despite the exterior and the out of school mentoring that the community brings, I think it's also important that our teachers get to know our kids that they teach on a much higher level. This is more than just, content. I think it's important that they understand the kids that are sitting in front of them and where they come from, the values that they have, and the influence that home brings, because I think that's a big barrier to academic success that we see here in Bridgeport as well.
Well, thank you for that perspective, and also just you're the leaders in making sure that this relationship with a purpose happens. And I'm so happy and glad you were able to kind of talk to that, because I think people need to hear that as they go through, districts go through whether or not to switch from in-person to virtual. It's a very important message to hear that there are people in their districts that are doing this right now. And with that said, we can move to the next slide, and we could talk about what does that look like to switch from in-person to a virtual platform. And so what we've done here at the partnership is we've made some virtual mentoring guidelines for mentoring coordinators and for districts to be able to download and to look at those things and apply them to their programs. Next slide, please. So the first up, a virtual mentoring guidelines for mentoring coordinators for community-based programs supporting schools. One of the things that you will need to do is obtain permission of parent guardian to begin virtually. That's important, and I hear that Ann and Faith did that over, in March of last year. These can be obtained electronically, verbally, via text or other means. The parent account is preferred rather than the mentee's account whenever possible. So remember, the family must have a computer or telephone to connect. Next slide, please. So school-based and site-based programs, mentoring coordinators must first secure the blessings and written permission of the superintendent of schools and school principals for virtual mentoring. Obtain written permission from parent and guardian for the sessions to commence. And that's very important, because I know that there are some school principals and superintendents that just don't know, what that looks like. And so we're trying to get the word out that, hey, it exists. At the Governance Prevention Partnership, we can give you a leg up on that. And there are other districts you could talk to obtain that information. Next slide, please. So ask mentors to sign a virtual mentoring agreement. This is important because they've already signed an agreement for in-person, but it's going to be important for them to adhere to the program parameters. Coordinators discuss virtual options. Mentors might find virtual quite agreeable with their busy schedules. Written agreements is kept in a mentoring programs file, and it's also an opportunity to make sure that you can expand it now, because if they were coming to the school to meet with school in a school-based setting face-to-face, now the travel might be out and they can meet virtually, and it's another opportunity to recruit new mentors that might have extra time to be able to sit down and promote those one-on-one relationships. Next slide. What's really important here is keep parent and mentor permissions safe and secure as part of the mentor-mentee programs file. These should include the name and the title, the parent and guardian of persons who granted approval and date, along with indicating the date when the first online contact began. Next slide, please. So assist in determining the best type of online communication for the mentor and mentee. This is really important. Some youth will have Chromebooks, right? And we've heard about that and the lack thereof, and for some districts. Other parents and guardians will indicate a preference for sessions via telephone. FaceTime, video chat, Zoom, email, or text, but we have to honor the parents' preferences in those areas. Next slide, please. Take the lead in initial contacts between mentors and mentees. So this is for a district or program coordinator to make sure they do this. Prepare mentees for sessions and clarify any school, mentor, or family rules that would limit the mentee screen time or online availability. Discuss the weekly sessions during school hours or after school gets out. Are either or options possible? Next slide, please. Troubleshoot, answer questions. The mentors and mentees might have technical challenges using the platform they have chosen. They have other issues and concerns. You have to troubleshoot those. And talked about the telephone. If there's a virtual telephone conversation, this is a part of the skill acquisition for young people to kind of learn that skill because we know that they're text heavy or Instagram or they're on Snapchat. Those platforms they navigate very well, but telephone etiquette, as we'll talk about later on in the slide, is something more of a skill that they can learn. Next slide. So what we found since the pandemics began has been highlighted by Bridgeport is that some mentors do not have technical capability for Zoom-like sessions with their mentee. People are coming up to speed now. The mentoring coordinator can assist with that with the platform either the school provides, such as Google Hangout or Microsoft Teams. And some mentees can teach their mentors, which might be fun. And we know that the mentors are catching on, the mentees are catching on really quick. And so they can help their mentors navigate this space as well. So it's a win-win situation for that relationship. The next slide, please. Some programs are opting for a hybrid combination, and for the most part, that's what's happening. Things are very fluid in this time right now. Some school districts are going back 5 days a week. Some are, cutting back. And so those are some of the things that we're experiencing. So one session each month on video, one via email or text, other via telephone or FaceTime. Some mentees who are in school are talking to their mentor from that setting in their usual location. So these are all options, and I think had a conversation today with a mentor coordinator about switching options, but they have options. So this is something you definitely can look at, and it doesn't have to be one way if it doesn't work. Next slide, please. Also, remind mentors of their role. Mentors focus on giving attention to their mentee. Mentors are a constant in the mentors' lives, as we heard from Ann's example of young people whose lives have been, in many cases, turned upside down. They are not responsible for their entire family doing errands, such as dropping off groceries or answering calls for them. Next slide, please. Mentors must set limits on their relationship and time spent with their mentee. Offer many online strategies and activities for match engagement. Now, this is key because it's virtual, there might be a tendency to be too long or not as long. So that's something we have to kind of gauge and just encourage program coordinators and mentors to act accordingly and to make sure that, remember when you met face-to-face, it was that hour. Try as close as possible to get to that. That's what we're shooting for in this relationship with a purpose. The next slide, please. And so what if what if the mentee in particular finds it difficult to concentrate for the whole hour virtually? This is a challenging time. Spending 20 or 30 minutes is okay. So if that's a challenge, and we found out that it can be, right? This is if they're doing online or virtual learning or distance learning, that another face-to-face might be challenging for them. Spending 20 or 30 minutes is okay. And also try to make sure that that happens on a consistent basis. Next slide. It's going to be important to monitor and supervise the virtual matches. That's really a job of the program coordinators. It's something that needs to happen just like you were monitoring them face-to-face. So the best method is the same as that the mentors use to report their activities to mentor coordinators in a face-to-face programs. It has to get done. All activities should be recorded and kept in the file of the pairs, including when each virtual match began and, if necessary, ends. So I can't stress that enough. It's the same, even though it's a different platform and it feels a little different. Reporting what's going on like you did with the face-to-face is still going to be important. The next slide, please. Mentoring coordinators should consider reaching out to the parent and guardian informally to check on the status of the match. Always ask how you and the program can help in any issues that they're encountering. Notify parent or guardian if the mentee is not engaged. This is, I think, a great opportunity now to make sure that you really are present. And if it's virtually, you can pop in and ask the parent if they're there to, ask them how things are going. And that's something that I've been talking to some programs about and advising them to do that, to make sure that the parents are okay with this going on. Next slide, please. And we want to just stress, we can't stress this enough, to prohibit the use of social media, which is not prohibited. So other social media platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, TikTok, etc. These are serious and dangerous, and we want to make sure that it's just on the platforms that are signed into consent forms and approved by the mentor coordinators, the schools, the districts, and the parents. If necessary, a closure form should be signed by the mentor and parent and guardian to keep all the forms in the program file for each match. And if closure happens, we want to do that at the beginning of the match, and those things have already been signed, but we want to do that, make sure that it's covered when we're doing this virtually. So that's something we definitely want to make sure that the mentor and the parent guardian sign and they are very aware of. And we have our parent agreement for virtual mentoring. That's also important as well. So at the Prevention Work CT, you can download that resource package. It's in English as well as in Spanish. And so that's something that you can add to your program, and that's going to be needed. So the start and end dates of such virtual sessions and the end date of the week and time will be determined by the program's mentoring coordinator, of course. In order that the child may begin weekly sessions online with their current mentor, my written permission must be obtained. Together with the mentoring coordinator, we will discuss and agree on available technology at my home for the use of the mentor and mentee. So this language is going to be in that resource package you can download, and it's very important to make sure that upfront everybody is aware of what's happening when we switch from in-person to virtual. Next slide, please.
Yes, Steve, I have a question from one of the participants about the sign-off form. Is it the same as a FERPA permission form with parents? Is the closure form the same as FERPA permission from parents?
Wow, that's a great question, because FERPA covers a whole host of things, right? And this is just permission for this relationship to exist virtually. So it's not quite the same. When we talk about FERPA, we're talking about school records, we're talking about other things. This is just to ensure that we agree to meet virtually, right? Via the platform that is designated by the school, and that everybody is aware of that's happening.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I just want to follow up. If it makes it a little simpler, I try to tell the students it's like a permission slip. So say if you really wanted to go on a college tour, you wanted to go on this really great field trip with other people, this is a permission slip for something specific, and that mentoring would be that specific that they're getting permissions for. But FERPA, as you said, covers a wide range, and it's further reaching than this contract between your mentees.
Thank you. Next slide, please. And then we have the mentor agreement to engage in virtual mentoring. And so we want to make sure that although they've already signed up to be a mentor and they have an agreement, we want to make sure that they sign a mentor agreement to engage in virtual mentoring. That's going to be very important. Next slide. So what the language looks like for that. I understand I will begin such sessions after written parent-guardian permissions has been granted to the program's mentoring coordinator, who will inform me of the technology I will be using with my mentee and when the first session begins. So that's what that looks like for that mentor agreement at the beginning of that. Next slide, please. My role as a mentor is to focus on activities each week to keep my mentee engaged until we can see each other in person when the program resumes face-to-face, such as Superintendent Tasani talked about. We can't wait till that happens, but until then, we want to make sure that I will be present to virtually focus on my relationship with the mentee and not to be in any way responsible for filling any needs or requests of the family. These will be communicated to my mentoring coordinator. Next slide, please. And so those covers the virtual mentoring consent forms, which districts and programs will need to implement before really going into virtual mentoring. And so now we'll talk about some virtual mentoring etiquette. And we also have a form on the Governance Prevention Partnership website that speaks to this as well. Next slide. So virtual mentoring etiquette. Dress appropriately for the session. While many of us are working from home, clothing such as pajamas are not permitted. Make a good impressions on your mentee. And we don't want to talk about all the whole slew of people just not dressing appropriately. We see that all the time. They're funny, but we want to really take this serious, especially when we focus on these relationships with a purpose, that we're putting our best foot forward in a dignified manner. Next slide, please. Be aware of your surroundings. Select a quiet location before beginning the session. Look around and make sure that if the e-mentoring is in the video as well as audio format, your background needs to be appropriate. Therefore, a setup that happens to include the personal cocktail bar, for example, should not be considered. Sitting on your bed is not either. And trust me, we've seen so many meetings and we've been in meetings with professional people that are really not the best, right? You know, they don't really look good. And so we just want to make sure that mentors have this information to present their best foot forward. Next slide, please. And remember, mentors are good listeners. Remember that during this difficult time, mentees have been isolated socially and physically. Their routine has been disrupted. They're starving for attention. So mute your microphone when you're not talking and share your mentee why. They can do the same and they're doing the talking. Remember the mentor rule. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so listen twice as much as you talk. Mic check. Make sure that your audio voice is high enough that your mentee can hear you. And you know, something we did when we started our presentation to make sure we can hear everybody, you want to make sure that you do that with your mentees. Next slide, please. Don't be distracted. Paying attention to your mentee is key. If you're also fiddling with your keyboard or cell phone or writing, your mentee will feel they are not important to you. So animals are also a distraction, mentor and mentee. And we don't have to talk about that because I know we've all heard our 4-legged friends in the background of many of our meetings. And it's just something just to, at the forefront of our minds, to be cognitive of when we're having our one-on-one relationships with a purpose with our mentors and mentees. Next slide, please. So check with your mentoring coordinator regarding policies of food during sessions. Stay seated. in one place during the session and don't move around and stay present. And the reason why we ask that for virtual mentoring etiquette is that there are some serious challenges around food security for our mentees. They sometimes might be going without food. And if you're sitting there with a cheeseburger and you're having a conversation, that could really, really stress out our mentees. And so it's a way of just, you know, not having any food that is present. So, because we never know if our mentees' parents have lost their job, or like I said, they don't have any food. And it's just something to consider. And I think that when we put that out there, people are like, oh, that does make sense, because when I did talk to my mentee, they were having some struggles and they had to be provided with resources to a soup kitchen or to a food bank. So there's just something to consider. And that's the reason why that is there. Next slide, please. We talked about a lot of things, and I want to just really just emphasize this great opportunity to apply for training and technical assistance via the National Mentoring Resource Center. Districts, mentoring programs can apply for no-cost technical assistance through the National Resource Center. If you go to Prevention Work CT, the Governor's Prevention Partner website, you can click on a link, and then you can also download the application, and you can ask for this, and then we'll be more than happy to come out to kind of help you put these things in place and together, and just to provide this training and technical assistance. It's just been refunded, so we're just so happy that this resource is out there for programs to get this training and technical assistance. You might not know what to do next, because I've heard of a lot of programs existing, and then COVID hit, and then they're saying, well, we're not going to provide the service anymore. And I'm asking why. And they said, we just don't know where to start. And that began the conversation of saying, hey, we have this resource. And then that's when we get the ball rolling again to get the information that's critically needed for programs to provide mentoring services again to their districts. Next slide, please. So here's my contact information. We're coming up on close to our webinar today. You can contact us at the Governor's Prevention Partnership. My name is Aristide Hill. I'm on the website. If you just click on preventionworkct.org, and you'll find staff, and then you can go ahead and send me an email through there. I've already kind of got some emails and some downloads of some of our resource packages, even as we've been doing this webinar. So thank you for people checking out our website. And also the State Department of Education, they're going to talk about contacting them so they can loop you in as well. So my email is there, and also my phone number. And because we have today's technology, I'm able to answer the phone on my cell phone. And so you can give me a call. Like in every webinar I do with a large audience, I always get phone calls. I love it. And also get emails. And my email address is aristide.hill@preventionworkct.org. And next slide, please.
I think we are running out of time for questions and answers. At this point, we're going to take the questions off of the webinar that we're inputted into our Q&A, and write some responses and share them with the attendees, and make an FAQ for others.
Awesome.
So these are some sites that Aristide was sharing to find these documents. There were questions about how to download information. So you could go to preventionworkct.org, and you can follow the Prevention Partnership on Twitter, Facebook, and on Instagram. And lastly, here is my information for the Connecticut State Department of Education. To find more information on student attendance engagement, you can always email me at kari.sullivan@ct.gov. And I too can answer my work phone from my cell phone at 860-807-2041. I'd like to thank everyone for your participation today and your patience with the technology glitches. We apologize for that, but we're grateful for your patience and attendance in this session. Thank you to our partners at the Governor's Prevention Partnership, and I wish everybody a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.